everyone, welcome back to Dev Parkour. I'm Brian Parks, and in this video I want to talk about why I'm not going to make Glassminnow open source. This may or may not have been a question that you had, but I thought I'd address it before it comes up, because it is actually something that I spent some time thinking about and really thinking hard about, because initially this piece of software was something that it was completely proprietary, built for a company. Now I think I've mentioned before that I own the rights to the software, so that's no longer an issue. I could, if I wanted to, open source the software. The problem is it's been years and years and years since I wrote the software, so to be honest, I don't really know what's in there, and I don't necessarily want to just open source all of this stuff that might work, might not work, especially might have usernames and passwords for things. I know I've come across a couple already. Thankfully, I don't think any of them are connected to anything anymore, and if they are, they're deactivated accounts, and they wouldn't do anything. You might be able to plug them into your code, but you wouldn't get anywhere from them. And you might even have seen some usernames and passwords in some videos. Some of them might show up in future videos, just kind of by accident. But I don't want to inadvertently share things that probably shouldn't be shared, right? So at least until I get the code to a point where it's safe from that perspective, I'm not going to be open sourcing it. And if I do, obviously I'd have to truncate the Git history. We'd start fresh with known, good, safe code that wasn't inadvertently showing things. So that's kind of the standpoint that I'm coming from. Now, in your own projects, you might want to open source them. And there are a couple different reasons you might want to. The old school logic of I don't want to open source this because I don't want to give away the trade secrets, is these days more of a myth than truth. There are plenty of examples of companies built around open source technologies. Of course, we all know companies like Red Hat built around open source Linux, right? They make money selling the services and the support for the platform, so much so that they're now owned by IBM. But even some newer software falls into that boat as well. One of my friends here in Colorado was the engineering director of a company called Reaction Commerce. They built an open source e-commerce solution, and built a successful company around it. They actually got acquired by MailChimp a few months ago. And then there's a huge company called Instructure in Seattle. This is something that I came across in one of my other side projects. They build a learning management system, a fairly advanced learning management system. I think it's probably the most widely used one these days, called Canvas. That is completely open source, right? So you can build a successful business on open source technologies. You can build an open source product. Now, if there's an algorithm or something like that that is kind of the secret sauce, obviously you might not want to open source that. So you might have 90% of your product be open source, but then the key piece that really gives you your competitive edge, if you're in a business that needs that, is closed source. At the same time, there's nothing wrong with having closed source products. My day job, our product is not open source, and it's not going to be open source anytime soon. It's a SaaS product, but even if it weren't, we're not going to release the code for the world to see. And there are a variety of reasons you might want to do that. I'm not going to speak specifically to my company's reasons behind that, but it's ultimately it's just a business decision, right? Do you want to open this up to the world and get all this feedback and contributions, and there is some responsibility that goes along with that, right? You do need to foster the community. You do need to moderate what goes on. You need to be responsive to bug reports and pull requests and stuff like that. And that's something that maybe you're not willing to do. You don't really want the community's assistance in building your product. You want to do it all in-house, and that's totally fine. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that just because you want to build a business on it doesn't mean you can't open source it. Now, if you are going to open source your software, then you have to talk about licensing. And I'll leave a link to the video I did about how to choose a third-party product based on open source licenses. I'll leave a link to that down in the description. But the license that you choose, a lot of stuff in that video it correlates. Because if you want anybody and everybody to be able to use the code, you might want to license it under a very permissive license like BSD or MIT. Basically, here's some code, go ahead and use it for however you want. Just don't necessarily say, I promote your particular product. Then there are some where you might specifically want to tie, you want to make sure that if someone uses your code, your attribution is clearly marked. There are licenses to support that too. And then of course there's the GPL. Anything you do has to be open source, right? It has to be at least as open source as the stuff you built it on. And that's ultimately, I think that's really a personal decision. Well, personal/business decision, right? It's how do you want people to be able to use the code that you've created? Do you want people to be able to use the code that you've created directly? Or do you just want them to be able to use either the hosted products or the binary distributables if you're building like a desktop app or a mobile app or something like that. So those are kind of my thoughts on why I'm not open sourcing Glassminnow, at least not right now. Maybe in the future. We'll see. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. And why you might be interested in open sourcing some of the projects you work on. And that said, I have open sourced some of the projects that I've worked on. I've mentioned Pales before, which is the PHP web application framework that Glassminnow is actually built on. That's open source. You can go ahead, use that. You can download that. You can contribute to that. I'll leave a link to that GitHub repository as well. So hopefully you found this video helpful. Go ahead and click that thumbs up button, subscribe, and click that notification bell so you'll be notified when new videos come out. And hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you tomorrow.